Change. We live in a world of constant change. Everything around us is changing one way or another. We have made tremendous advances over the last decades in areas such as technology, medicine, infrastructure, and more. But why is it that it has been so difficult to have change in the fight for equal rights and discrimination against people of different races? At a distance, one would think that racial inequalities would be non-existent in the world we live in today. But the reality is that there have been only a few improvements in the last few decades for when it comes to having equal rights and treatment for people of different races. It is time for change. Tremendous efforts have been made only for small improvements for basic rights. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a prime example of a person who fought tremendously hard for the civil rights of African Americans in the US back in the 1950s and 60s. Around 60 to 70 years later, we are still experiencing horrible acts of racial discrimination, such as the George Floyd incident, which sparked riots and protests all around the world. These recent Black Lives Matter protests are a prime example of how racial discrimination is still a very real issue and how it impacts so many people around the world. People of different skin color and people who come from different places around the world have been judged, discriminated against, treated differently, and given less opportunities for far too long. These people encounter obstacles such as poverty, violence and crime, geographic isolation, and much more on a daily basis, and that is unacceptable. It is time for change. Now, this change is easier said than done because this idea or culture of racial discrimination is something that is sadly deeply rooted into the depths of this nation's founding. But that is why this change begins with the new generation. Racial discrimination is not a natural behavior, but rather a taught and learned behavior based on the actions of those around you. Changing this idea and culture begins with parents and family members teaching and exposing their kids to be accepting and loving of everyone and fully embracing a diverse setting. Parents can also expose their kids to more positive images of racial groups, help their kids develop cross-group friendships, cultivate cross-group friendships as a parent, and talk explicitly about race and the effects of racism. These types of conversations and interactions may be uncomfortable for some at first, but being comfortable with being uncomfortable is something that needs to be understood in order to have progress. An important place in which children can experience a diverse environment is the classroom, and it is also a place in which kids can learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Schools play an essential role in the development of youth, so it is crucial that teachers and staff at schools provide a good environment for all students, regardless of their backgrounds and race. Addressing racial discrimination in schools is something that has more often than not been avoided and overlooked. But in order to begin to change for the next generation, it is crucial that schools teach their students about how to be accepting and loving of one another. Once schools are able to have full immersion in the classrooms and show their students what it means to have a truly diverse environment, and when parents are able to have these tough conversations with their children about how to fight against racism and racial discrimination, then we can begin to change the problem that is racial discrimination in our world today.